There was a lot of disappointment from people when WWE decided to become PG. The moment they fully went and became a family-friendly product completely changed everything from the stories to the demographics of fans that watch WWE. When it came down to it, PG in a nutshell clearly limited a lot of wrestlers and storylines that would have been way better with the TV-14 rating. WWE wasn't even doing some super crazy stuff at the time, but I guess they were scared of pushing the limit on the rating, so that's why everything felt tame and very boxed in, I guess. This video isn't about that, considering me shilling for this era of WWE. 2008 was the beginning of PG, and ironically, the moment they turned PG, WWE had an intense feud between Shawn Michaels and Chris Jericho going on. It was very personal and bloody early on. This tested their limits a lot because HBK bled profusely in their first match, so it was going to be tough to keep up that intensity. They did just that though, with Chris Jericho putting on some of his best work on the mic and in the ring at the time. It culminated with a ladder match, and one of the best ladder matches ever, I'd say, my personal favorite. I don't know how WWE could have made this feud better because I think it reached its full potential. It went from a bloody and personal battle to championship gold. It had everything tied to it. But WWE clearly saw the personal aspect of the story and decided to flesh that out more for one of their bigger feuds a couple of months later. The Viper had returned to WWE with a lot of venom. He got himself into some problems with the McMahon family and decided to stand in the face of the boss and slap him before punting him. This kick-started WWE's biggest story heading into WrestleMania, a story that asked for something different from both Triple H and Randy Orton. On paper, Triple H is mostly the same, but the difference is that he felt more vulnerable when compared to his previous stories. For Orton, it was a change in his character. He always used to be the legend killer and someone who was cold and calculated, but here he was unstable. There was countless great segments to come from this one and showed that WWE had what it takes to have compelling stories under the PG rating. They still talk about this story to this day. They still talk about 2009 Randy Orton, which honestly needs to be a topic that becomes illegal. They need to treat it like a taboo subject. I'd like for that to happen. Constantly, 2009 Randy Orton this. We're getting off topic. That's not the point. But it was a great storyline, and they even had a great match. Well, I don't know about that one. They ruined it with the stipulation having Triple H wrestle a normal match, as if that matched what this storyline was about. I absolutely hate they botched the story because we didn't even give them a chance to disappoint us properly. At least let them disappoint us with a no DQ match. And that was very unlikely because they had a pretty good match on Raw a couple of weeks later. A match that was better than the pay-per-view they were promoting, which is the Bash 2009, of course. So odds are that seeing its WrestleMania in the brightest lights, maybe, just maybe, they would have pulled something here for the fans and for the storyline. It was so good, and WWE even had some steam with the story after WrestleMania, but it just fizzled out. I guess they were overexposed. And I'm not saying Orton and Triple H had great chemistry, but at least let them have that big match at WrestleMania. You know, like, I don't think it was going to be super amazing or anything like that because they weren't exactly a great match for each other. Their styles clashed a bit, similar to how Orton and Cena did, you know, but just set the stakes and set the match properly for them to actually go out there and do it. Because the fact that they had Triple H being threatened to be disqualified limited a lot of the offense in his arsenal, and it threw away the momentum the feud had. SmackDown's Intercontinental Championship was wonderful. It was already having more of an honorable feeling to it previously with the likes of William Regal, CM Punk, JBL, and Rey Mysterio holding it, but the moment it came to SmackDown, it got even better. Jericho was on fire at the time and arguably the best all-around wrestler in the WWE. I know I believe that one, and having him battle Rey Mysterio for the belt was amazing stuff. They had 3 great matches with the finale at the Bash being, and I know this sounds dramatic, but this is what I believe. It's one of the best matches in WWE history. Actually, the wagers, the high stakes, the creativity with the ending, tremendous stuff in a series you must watch if you haven't because it brought out the very best in Rey Mysterio. The only program that matches this for him in WWE was the SmackDown 6. Yeah, he had those great matches with Andrade, but they didn't have the same stakes or feeling to them. ECW wasn't too bad this time. It was decent, but mostly carried by Christian. Christian was supposed to be on SmackDown, but they opted to have him lead the brand. And similar to Jericho, he was one of the more consistent wrestlers on the show and had plenty of hidden gems. I recommend his matches with Chris Jericho and CM Punk on ECW. Those were 2 of his best TV matches. The ladder match against Shelton Benjamin was definitely his best pay-per-view match, and Christian held it down for ECW. Without him, that brand would have almost nothing but constant Lance Archer and Shelton Benjamin rematches. SmackDown, though, was on lockdown at the time. They had a very well-balanced roster with some of the best in-ring performers on the entire roster, and the main event stories would just flow seamlessly. The action throughout the entire time was never dull on top. The mid-card scene had some new singles talent like John Morrison coming in, and that man was on fire that year. They added him to that mid-card roster that had Ray, Jericho, Edge, and he came out of it looking like a surefire start. I thought 2009 was one of Morrison's best years and a year that showed he had what it takes to be a babyface, something he never properly did in his career. And here, his first chance, he goes out and becomes a great babyface. Jeff Hardy finally got his time to shine on top, and he wasn't even on top for long, yet fans still remember his story fondly. A man that never pulled down the brass ring, always a great performer, but never had it in him to get the job done. And I love the whole story with him starting to wear face paint and becoming more and more angry about things. His win was so fulfilling and an incredible moment. Hardy didn't have too much time on top due to his own situation, but one has to wonder, what if he really did. Because this man had the very best reactions from the crowd at the time, an absolute superstar, and WWE seemed to understand that but weren't willing to place him front and center, especially as the world champion. Even then, he got 3 reigns out of it, so it wasn't too bad. What was bad, though, was his departure. I remember missing Hardy. He obviously went to TNA, but it didn't hit the same. As for the man that got rid of him, 2009 was incredible. CM Punk came out of his shell that year, and it's mostly because of how he was portrayed. He wasn't a bad face, but as evident by his title reign, he was never going to be truly on top with the likes of John Cena, Batista, and Triple H around. That was never going to happen, so him as a heel was always the opening he was going to make good on. Summer of Punk 2005 was brought to the WWE fans in 2009, and this man was detestable and a great talent. He was logical but so douchey you'd forget he had a great point. I don't drink, I don't smoke. That motto was increased tenfold here and used as a badge of honor for CM Punk. And the worst part is that it didn't last too long. He got de-pushed and formed a Stretch Society. The faction was good for what it was, but really should have been developed better because Punk had a great transition into a douchey heel who now found out he had more power than he realized. That feud with Ray was a highlight of Friday night, so it makes everything confusing. Why would they not continue building momentum for a character that many considered to be the best heel on SmackDown? And I think he was. I think he was the best villain at the time. Punk took over the summer of 2009 and he had more tools with a faction but less power. I wish it went differently because the moment the feud ended with Ray and he started wearing that mask, his year went downhill and had to be traded to Raw later on, which worked out for the very best for him. I will say that though, 2010 was most definitely the worst year for WWE in the early years of the PG rating. The reason why is because even though Raw wasn't that interesting in 2009, SmackDown was on fire. 2010, on the other hand, took away everything from SmackDown, and so both Raw and SmackDown were rough. Plus, there was this uninterest in making things change. Like, you watch a Raw show from November of 2010, and it feels like nothing's gonna happen and nothing's gonna change. That's never a good thing. The beginning parts of the year did give everyone false hope. For one, Shawn Michaels' story of being the one to end the streak was the best. HBK lost himself and lost the essence of who the Heartbreak Kid was, trying to chase down an accomplishment that was almost impossible, ending the streak. This in turn led to some of his best character work and some calculated decisions to try and get the match. These options all didn't work. The Undertaker declined the rematch, and it took Michaels costing him the title to finally get him to accept. But he wanted HBK's career on the line. This was a great build-up. They had 2 amazing promos for the match, running up the hill by Placebo, and another one for the main show. And the match didn't disappoint. That's how a WrestleMania rematch should go. And ended up being HBK's final match for 8 years. He retired with grace and honor and had one of the most iconic matches of his career. Something that ranks with the best of them. He went out with the highest of highs, and unfortunately, WWE's year went out with a high here because after WrestleMania, there wasn't much. The momentum WWE had around WrestleMania time was somewhat big, if I remember correctly. The fact that Bret Hart returned, which was very big, it was huge. Him feuding with McMahon was going to be like a satisfying conclusion. And yeah, that match was horrible and terrible, but it closed the knot on that whole Montreal story that everyone was talking about for the last 13 years. Heel Batista was world class, one of the best eras or runs Batista had in his entire career, because he was just a douche. He was a whiny baby at times, and he was a powerhouse. He was all 3 of these things which seemed contradictory at the same time, and he made it work. It also unlocked some of his promo skills, which he had improved on throughout the years, but it was never at this level. And that is mostly because of the fact that he was a heel. It was great stuff here. It's just unfortunate that it didn't last too long because Batista was very unhappy with the PG rating and how it limited his character, which I agree with. But he still did good with those limitations. There was a time after WrestleMania where Batista, Undertaker, Shawn Michaels, Triple H, they all disappeared. And there wasn't many wrestlers on the roster that had momentum at the time. Edge's face run didn't go as planned, and he didn't have much momentum as a heel. Chris Jericho wasn't getting pushed anymore as much as he did. And there was some bright spots like Evan Bourne and whatnot, but the biggest bright spot at the time, and this in itself is one of those stories that did go bad later on, was the Nexus. The Nexus was a plague that caught the WWE by storm. I remember their debut very well. They debuted in Miami, destroyed the ring, destroyed the commentators, destroyed the cameramen. Everything about it felt very raw, no pun intended. It was the most courageous thing WWE did in a couple of years. It was so confident because they got 7 alleged unknowns. Obviously, some of you know them. And they got 7 guys, or 8 at the time. Up to SummerSlam, the Nexus storyline was a huge success. It was big, it was entertaining, it was something to tune into every week, and it was fresh, the most important. WWE knew what they were doing with the storyline. They had it dominate Raw throughout the weeks up to SummerSlam. Yes, I get it. We know what happened with John Cena, finish. Yeah, That's not the point of this video, though. The point of this video is the fact that the Nexus storyline was one of the best things and one of the worst things WWE did that year. I obviously don't think the Nexus were going to become world champions, each one of them, but I do think Wade Barrett deserved to win the title during this run. He was an imposing and great leader. He had a certain look about him. He could wrestle. He was comfortable. And that's the thing you want most with your wrestlers on the roster. I think he deserved to be the WWE champion at the time. Obviously, there came problems with the fact that John Cena did all this and whatnot, but it was still, as contradictory as it sounds, it was still a highlight of 2010. Like, yeah, John Cena was beating them up later on, wearing purple, overcoming the odds, fake fired and nonsense, all that. Acting like he's fired when WWE would never fire their biggest money earner. They would never do that. I just think WWE messed up on the booking in some parts of it, and yeah, like, that's all I have to say about it. I just wanted to mention it here because it was something to tune into. I remember 2010 very well. It was the thing that had the most attention to it in the wrestling world. The Nexus. It was just fresh. It was new. And it's something WWE lacked at the time. They weren't trying to do anything innovative or new. Nexus was just that. There was some minor hidden gems at the time. You know, in-ring stuff was better, I'd say. And we did get some good matches like Daniel Bryan versus Dolph Ziggler at Bragging Rights. A match which actually nearly beat out the WrestleMania 26 main event between Shawn Michaels and The Undertaker and a WWE.com poll. That goes to show you how much fans really enjoyed it. It was a great match. I just wanted to mention that here as one of those matches that catches you off guard. It really looked so out of place at the time. The road to WrestleMania 27 was wonderful, and it brought a certain electricity that WWE had lacked in some time. The Rock's return coincided with this, alongside The Undertaker and Triple H's. Trish Stratus came back. They were promoting Snooki. John Cena was challenging for the title again. It was very big. Electricity like we haven't seen in a while. WWE seemed very hype around WrestleMania 27, but once the show actually happened and turned out to be one of the biggest flops of the entire year, it was a good draw though. They made a lot of money from it, but it was a horrible show. It was bad. There was a lot of crowd interest. I remember at the time the crowds were more engaging with the stories and stuff, but like after WrestleMania, it was just dry. And it felt like nothing notable was going to happen. Like when you look at that time period's perspective, who was going to follow John Cena once he won the title? You just didn't really think about it much. Oh, it's going to be John Cena versus Alberto Del Rio at SummerSlam. Like that's the big main event they got. When you look at it from that time's perspective. Then all of a sudden, CM Punk came out. His storyline came from a real place with his WWE contract set to expire on July 17, 2011, and they used this to build a big story with John Cena, which in turn unlocked the true potential of CM Punk in WWE. He had been in good positions and whatnot, and probably would have won the title eventually as a heel, but this storyline really changed everything and turned him from a heel to an anti-hero. We all know about the pipe bomb. We all know blah, blah, blah. He changed the game with it. We all know. He brought a certain fire that WWE lacked in this entire era and had a lot of fan support behind him. They tried to portray him as a villain, you know, a guy who thinks for himself, as opposed to thinking for the company like John Cena does. Fans obviously saw through. They sided with CM Punk because he was like the anti-hero. And once he won the title in a great match at Money in the Bank, that turned him face. Punk just randomly morphed into a babyface, and WWE accidentally developed a feud that was their modern Austin and Rock feud. That's what it was. It just came by accident, and in turn, CM Punk was the breakout, I want to say breakout star, but you get what I mean by that. He was the guy that changed drastically in 2011. He got pushed to the stratosphere and won multiple WWE championships in only a short time. Punk's year could have gone down differently, you know, like that Triple H match and whatnot. But there's no denying that he was a star. With Edge's untimely retirement, SmackDown was left with a big hole in the main event scene. There's only one way to actually fill in that hole, and that was to bring in a major star from Raw, so they brought in Randy Orton. This coincided with Christian's first World Championship victory, a title victory which was very memorable and emotional due to the fact that it never seemed like Christian would actually make it to the top of the WWE. But the title reign quickly came to an end only 2 days after Christian won it. 5 technically if you count Friday Night SmackDown as it used to be. But it ended after 2 days in a great match with Randy Orton. Christian's title reign was over like that, and it didn't seem like he'd win it again, especially if he was a face. There is a problem with this feud in the fact that it's very one-sided, but it's one of the best stuff both men have done in their entire careers. Randy Orton finally found his true match. Christian was a guy that matched him perfectly. He sold for him well. They had great pacing in their matches. They had great stories within the matches. And I don't think up to this point, Randy Orton had somebody that was a better opponent for him than Christian. Christian was like the best possible opponent Orton could have at the time, followed by Daniel Bryan, who they eventually did later on. But this feud was so good. It was Christian complaining about having one more match, becoming a corrupt person, to the point where even Edge, a guy who wasn't even the best person himself, came out and criticized Christian for winning a title on a disqualification. I do wish WWE revisited this feud later on, because I feel like these two could have been rivals for life in a similar vein like John Cena and CM Punk were at the time. I do wish they explored it more, because the feud was a very important one for both men in their careers. I think if you talk about their stories in their careers, you have to mention it. So I do wish they explored it more. Who knows, they probably would have, but then Christian got injured and had to retire a couple of years later. Mark Henry's WWE run was mostly a disappointment for the first half of his career. First half, I'd say, is an entirely disappointment. He returned in 2006 to pessimism. You know, a lot of people weren't really looking forward to it because Henry hadn't really done much in his career previously to give a damn about him. He had that WrestleMania match with The Undertaker, but slowly he was improving to become a solid big man for the company, but it was never going to lead to a world championship. They did have that title reign in ECW, and you can call that a world championship technically, but we all know that's not a world championship. He was coasting around throughout the years until 2011 when they just randomly decided to push him as a monster heel. For SmackDown, he actually drew higher ratings than Christian and Orton, which is almost shocking to me, but it goes to show you how well the story was, with Mark Henry being at the top of the food chain and having constant challenges coming to him, and he just beat them clean. Be like, who's gonna beat him? Randy Orton, Christian, The Big Show, who's gonna beat him? It was a great story and gave Mark Henry something to look back on fondly throughout his career, which is of course the Hall of Pain. It is crazy how things could turn out, because only a year ago Henry was just losing constantly in tag team matches on Raw, and now he was the most dominant wrestler in the entire WWE. Not even John Cena was dominant as Mark Henry was at the time, and that's saying something. Alright, that's the good things about the PG era. I just wanted to shill for it for a bit, just because I thought that was a good video idea. I don't know about the worst of PG. You guys will probably like that. Who will see. Only time will tell. But I wanted to talk about the very good stuff in here. There's some stuff we left out, like Edge and Undertaker. That wasn't mostly in the PG era as opposed to the Chris Jericho and Shawn Michaels story, which 3/4 of it was literally in the PG era. So it made sense for me to talk about that more. But I enjoyed making this video. I like talking about some of the good stuff here. It's just WWE at the time were struggling to figure out what they were, their identity. And once The Rock came back, they started to figure out, hey, we could be a little more loose. But even then, they didn't fulfill the full potential of the era because there was a lot of tremendous wrestlers, talents that were around. It's just when you watch it live, it's much harder to go through, so yeah. Alright, what do you guys think of the PG era? Please comment down below. That's the first video. Make sure you hit the AA on the like button and perhaps the RK on the subscribe button. Peace. I'm out.